permit me to read something. I'm not big on reading, but it's short. It's short and it's compelling, and it just may have the profound effect on you that it had on me when I read it back in 2006. Who expects you to be somebody? How did you end up on the streets? Roger, a big burly man, sat in silence and stared at me, a nervous, skinny interviewer with wire-rimmed glasses. He thought about the question for a few minutes, the words echoing through his head as he searched for a response. Seated in a chair 3 feet in front of him, I eagerly awaited his reply. Roger scratched his head and caught me glancing at his hand. His rough, leathery skin had clearly endured the elements during the 2 decades he had been on the streets. His nails were caked with dirt. His hollow eyes revealed an emptiness that I could see even before I asked the first question. Roger described to me the great life he once had. He had grown up in a wonderful home, was married right after graduating from college, found a job with a respectable mechanical engineering firm, bought a house and 2 cars, had 3 kids by the age of 30. To my surprise, Roger had lived a very normal life. Then Roger explained to me what had happened so many years ago to change all that. He described how his frustration at work was increasing each day. His only real friend at work, Jimmy, had been fired. Aside from his wife, Jimmy was Roger's best friend in the world. They joined a bowling league together, went hunting trips every November together. Their families were close. Roger and Jimmy had offices right next to each other, and they talked every day, not just about work, but about personal matters as well. Their friendship kept both men engaged in a job that would have otherwise been dreary. Since Jimmy's termination, Roger could hardly muster the motivation to go to work. For 8 years, Roger and Jimmy were forced to tolerate the same boss, Mike, a hostile man who took every opportunity to remind his employees how much seniority he had with the company. Mike would belittle Roger, Jimmy, and other employees at every turn. As Roger described Mike, you could tell he was one of those managers whose abrasive demeanor inflicted damage far beyond the 9-to-5 workday. When Roger recounted stories about Mike, his jaw tightened, and he raised his lower lip into a scowl. He seemed to be seething with hatred. Roger's peers at work didn't make the situation any better. They all suffered through Mike's abuse in stoic silence. After Jimmy was fired, Roger was left with his boss and a few other engineers who didn't say much. They rarely socialized on the job. Everybody was simply punching a clock at work, eager to get out of there at the end of the day. By the time Roger finished work each evening, he needed an escape. So he began drinking. At first, Roger stopped by the neighborhood bar 1 or 2 nights a week. Soon that became 5 or 6 nights of heavy drinking. Even though his family tried hard to reverse his downward spiral, he began to self-destruct. As Roger described his wife's efforts to help, the pain in his voice spoke volumes. He could not bring himself to call her by name during our interview, nor did he ever mention his children's names. At the age of 32, Roger had lost his job, his wife, and his children. He had moved into an apartment. For 6 months, his mother had paid his rent and tried desperately to help him. Roger continued to push her away. Like the others, she eventually gave up on him out of frustration. Left with no means of support, Roger was forced to live in his car. One day, he returned from his daily journey, scrounging for food, and he found that even his meager home was gone. Police had impounded his car because of back taxes and unpaid parking tickets. Roger was officially homeless for the first time in his life. Roger recounted this last part of the story in a dry, matter-of-fact tone. I could tell the real turning points, the moments that had scarred his memory for 20 years, were Roger's final conversations with friends and loved ones. Once the relationships were broken, little else mattered. As Roger finished his lengthy reply to my question. He could sense that the interview was drawing to a close, but I had one last question. Who expects you to be somebody? Roger paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and said, I don't think anyone does anymore. Who expects you to be somebody? That is a portion of Chapter 1 of Tom Rath's book, Vital Friends, the people you can't afford to live without. I think it's a profound notion. I thought it was when I first read it. And I confess that I had not thought a lot about it. I certainly had not thought deeply about it until I read this. Who expects you to be somebody? I began to think about expectation. I began to think about the people that expect something of me. I began to think about the people of whom I expect things. I began to think about my kids. I began to think about my wife and I, and rearing and training and teaching our children as they grew up, and they're now grown. I used to wonder if I was too hard. I used to wonder if my expectations were too high, and as I grow older, I don't think so anymore. I think among the many gifts that we can give our children, the gift of expectation is high among them. I know as a manager, I know as a leader in business, that you tend to get what you expect. I know that you tend to get the results that you expect, financially and otherwise. And so it's no surprise to me, as I ponder these ideas and I think about them, that if we expect great things from our kids, if we expect great things from ourselves, we tend to get that. But if we let ourselves off the hook, if we let our kids off the hook, if we don't try to instill in them an accountability to be what they can be, to be who they can be, what a horrible disservice. What a horrible disservice. And I rather suspect that none of us would like the story that I just read from Tom Rath's work. I doubt we want to have little people who grow up in our homes who end up in that situation, answering that question, who expects you to be somebody? I rather think that we would dread to hear our children. I rather suspect we would dread to hear any child grow up and say, I don't guess anybody does anymore. My name is Randy Cantrell. You can find me at BulaNetwork.com. That's BULA Network.com. The new venture, LeaningTowardWisdom.com. Till next time, I'll see you.